Hi everyone, Leslie of Life Holistically. For those of you that do not know me, I'm first and foremost an aromatherapist with about 450 hours of education. And today I want to talk about the difference between an essential oil caution and contraindication. I'm going to give you a couple examples of those and then go into a few studies that support the contraindication and caution of a few items. So first, let's cover a contraindication. Now, contraindication is a situation where an essential oil is completely inadvisable, okay? So you should never use it. And in most cases, not all, the contraindication is via the oral pathway. There are some essential oils that are not recommended via all routes of use. And when I say all routes of use, I'm speaking to inhalation, oral, as well as dermal. But in most cases, if an essential oil is contraindicated, it is likely due to taking it internally in the oral pathway. Now, what are some examples of a contraindication? We're talking pregnancy, breastfeeding. Do not apply on or near the face of a child. I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail shortly. Do not use under a certain age. If you have cardiac issues, so that is a definite contraindication. If you have a G6PD deficiency, and what that means is it's a red situation where your red blood cell count can go down due to either an essential oil, a medication, a stressor. So there are certain essential oils that we want to avoid all routes due to this. And then phototoxicity, right? So if an essential oil is phototoxic, it's phototoxic for me as well as for you, and that is called a contraindication. Now, a caution is a little bit different. A caution is also considered a precaution. So, right, we're recommending to avoid it to avoid potential harm or adverse effect. There are some situations where it's going to be a case-by-case basis, or and a benefit does outweigh the risk. I'd like to give maybe an example. If I'm working with someone who is pregnant and has morning sickness and is so ill to the point where they are unable to eat, I may look at that as the benefit of giving them an inhaler to help reduce nausea and help them get some nutrition back into their body. That's going to be a case-by-case where a benefit does outweigh the risk. May not be something that I recommend for everybody if they're a high-risk pregnancy or whatnot. So that is another example of a caution. But some others would be if you're taking a medication where the essential oil would either inhibit or increase its effects. If you had a various illness or disease such as GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, peptic ulcer, or a bleeding disorder. So there are certain essential oils that are cautioned against using around major surgery for that very reason, such as, let's say, cinnamon bark or oregano. It's going to be cautioned around major surgery because it can also affect the bleeding. So if you have a bleeding disorder and it thins your blood, you're going to want to avoid that. And lastly is a caution would be using oxidized oil on the skin. So some examples of that, if we're looking at cinnamon bark is going to be contraindicated for all routes of use for a pregnant mother or someone who's breastfeeding. But it's only going to be cautioned, again, against certain medications or a bleeding disorder or surrounding major surgery. Now, if we're looking at oregano essential oil is contraindicated all routes for a pregnant or breastfeeding mother, but it's only cautioned dermally under the age of 2, and as well as orally if you're taking medications or have a bleeding disorder. So there's a big difference between a caution and a contraindication. And I want to move briefly into talking about using oils high in 1,8-cineol on or near the face of a child under 10. I just briefly spoke that is a contraindication. And there are various studies that back that up. I'm going to go over very briefly a couple of those studies just to show you the severity of the instances that were used to come to the conclusion of this contraindication. And the first one is, it was an installation of numerous drops of an essential oil blend called Olbas oil, and it was instilled directly in the nostril of a 4-month-old. Olbas oil contains essential oils of peppermint, eucalyptus, cajeput, wintergreen, juniper berry, and clove. Now, for aromatherapists out there, we know now that just in me saying those essential oils, there are many cautions with many of those constituents. So we're talking high levels of menthol, high levels of 1,8-cineol, methyl salicylate and wintergreen, which is to be avoided with children altogether, and eucalyptol, as well as eugenol with clove. So when we're looking at numerous drops, we're not really sure how many drops is numerous, but that was instilled directly in the nostril of a 4-month-old. They were brought to intensive care and did recover, so that's important to note. The second study that was used was in an almost 2-month-old who was sent into the intensive care unit 30 minutes after 1 ml of a solution was instilled in the nose rather than a sodium solution, so it was in error. We're looking at how many drops equate to a ml of essential oil. That's going to vary based on the density of an oil, but when we're looking at eucalyptus, it's about 35 drops of essential oil to a ml. So in this situation, 35 drops of eucalyptus was instilled in the nostril of a 2-month-old boy. And again, very extreme situation. He did recover as well, but that was another study that was used to come up with this contraindication. And lastly was a 6-year-old girl who had widespread rash and hives, and her parents took 25 ml solution. And when we're just take a step back and remember that 1 ml is 35 drops. So now we're talking 35 mLs. And it was applied to her trunk and her limbs and covered with soaked bandages and Glad wrap or Saran wrap. Okay, and then the next morning, which was the morning that she was admitted to the hospital, they did it again with 50 mLs this time of eucalyptol. She did recover, but on the way to the hospital, she did lose consciousness. So this is an example where eucalyptus became a central nervous system depressant, very much so, but she did recover. So it's important to note, to understand the studies, not to just read something in an article and take it from there, right? It's important as an aromatherapist that we're looking at the studies and we understand where the caution or the contraindication was born from, understanding the studies so that we can share accurate information and not extrapolate information. The next example I want to give is never use essential oils under the age of 2. Now, before I go into the reasoning behind this, I do want to say that it's important to note that I think everyone work from their level of education and experience, and if they've worked with children or if they've worked with pregnant women. And if they haven't, it's okay to say, look, I'm not comfortable giving that advice, but maybe I can refer you to a colleague or something like that, rather than just say, no, never do it. Okay, so when we're looking at essential oils under the age of 2, there is about 30 essential oils that are listed as do not use dermally. Okay, so we're not supposed to use those essential oils topically, and there's reason for that because they have an increased risk of skin irritation. Okay, and we know that in children under 2 as well, there are many systems in their body that aren't matured, such as their central nervous system, so we do need to use caution. Of the 30 essential oils that are not recommended dermally, there are only 2 that should not be used at all via all routes of use. And cinnamon bark would be an example of that. So it's important to not say never use essential oils under the age of 2. I like to recommend using more gentle things like herbs and homeopathics, but I also have a handful of oils that I would use under the age of 2 if necessary. So it's important to, again, not extrapolate information and to speak to where we're comfortable, again. And if you're not comfortable doing it, then just say you're not comfortable doing it. But it's important, I feel, just as much as it's not helping us to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will, and say all essential oils are safe for all children, it's important to not say we're never going to use essential oils under the age of 2. I think both are damaging to our modality and our community. So, but that basically covers what I wanted to talk about today, is the difference between a caution and a contraindication, and to understand the differences between those. So thanks for joining me today, everybody. Until next time.